Hi guys, before we start, I want you to look at these 3 sentences and decide if any of them are correct. He said me, Frank was lazy. George told that he needed to study. She talks 3 languages. Actually, none of these are correct. These should be: he told me Frank was lazy. George said that he needed to study. And she speaks 3 languages. If you're confused, don't worry, because in this video we're going to look at how to use the verbs say, tell, speak, and talk correctly. I'm not going to cover every single possible usage of these words because if I tried to do that, this video would probably be a couple of hours long, but we will look at the most important points. As always, remember that you can also follow me on social media, and if you'd like to subscribe to my free advanced English email lessons, you'll find the link in the description. We're first going to look at say and tell. Both of these verbs are about using words to express ideas and thoughts. If you look up the definitions of these words in a dictionary, they might be slightly different. For example, you might read that for say, the focus is often on the words that are used, and with tell, the focus is usually on the information, but the basic idea is the same. However, from a grammatical perspective, they are used differently. And by the way, both of these are irregular verbs. The past simple and past participle of say is said, and the past simple and past participle of tell is told. The structures that are generally used with these verbs are to say something to somebody and to tell somebody something. The parts in parentheses are optional. Here are some basic examples. Frank said something. If you don't know him yet, this is Frank. And if you want, you can add to plus a noun or an object pronoun. Frank said something to the teacher. Frank said something to George. Remember, names are a type of noun. Frank said something to him. You can't say Frank said the teacher something, or Frank said George something, or Frank said him something. You need the word to, and it goes after something. Now let's look at tell. Frank told George. This sentence is fine by itself because it's probably clear from the context what Frank said. If you want to use a pronoun, this sentence becomes Frank told him. From now on, I'll mainly use pronouns in the examples to make it easier. For example, me, him, her, etc. But remember that you can replace the pronouns with nouns, like the teacher or George. If you want to add something to this sentence, you need to say, Frank told him something. If you want to make questions out of these, you can say, what did Frank say? What did Frank say to him? Or, what did Frank tell him? You can't say, what did Frank say him? Or, what did Frank tell? Those are incorrect. Let's now look at direct speech. Direct speech is when you're quoting the exact words that somebody has said. We usually use say for direct speech. Frank said, "I'm bored." If you want to include who the information is for, you need to add to plus a noun or object pronoun. But here it goes immediately after said. Frank said to me, "I'm bored." You can't say, "Frank said me, I'm bored." You need the word to. Like I said, we usually use say for direct speech. But people sometimes use tell if they are providing information or giving an instruction. This sentence with tell is, "Frank told me, I'm bored." You can't say, "Frank told, I'm bored," because tell needs to be followed by a noun or a pronoun. In this sentence, Frank is giving me information. An example with an instruction is, the doctor told Frank, "Take 2 tablets a day." But you can't say, for example, "Frank told me hello," because hello is not information or an instruction. It's just a greeting. For direct speech that is not information or an instruction, we always use say. Frank said, "Hello." And on a side note, for things like greetings, farewells, apologies, or saying thank you or yes or no, we often don't use direct speech. For example, Frank said, "Hello." She never said sorry. They left without saying thank you. Frank wanted to leave early, but I said no. Let's now look at reported speech, which is sometimes called indirect speech. For reported speech, you can use say or tell, but again, you need to be aware of the different grammar that is used. Frank said that he was bored. If you want to make it clear who the information is for, again, you need to add to plus a noun or object pronoun. Frank said to me that he was bored. If you use tell, the sentence is, Frank told me that he was bored. And by the way, the that in these sentences is optional, which is why I put it in parentheses. We often use it in formal writing, but when we speak, we don't usually use that in these types of sentences. Now, when it comes to giving advice or instructions, we use tell if the information is directed at a specific person or specific people. For example, I told Frank to read a book. Frank told me to go away. If it's negative, we place not before to. They told us not to worry. If it's very clear from the context who the information is for, or if the information is not directed at a specific person, we use say. I said to read a book. They said not to worry. The label says to take 1 teaspoon after every meal. That's something that you might read on a medicine bottle, for example. There are just a couple more things you need to know about say and tell. For words like lie, truth, joke, and story, we use tell. Frank often tells lies. George told me the truth. Ethel likes to tell jokes. My colleague told her team a funny story. As you can see in the second and fourth sentences, if you want to include a pronoun or a noun, you need to place it immediately after tell. But be careful. With words like something, thing, this, that, we use say. She said something, but I didn't hear all the words. Frank said a funny thing yesterday. Did they say that? It's now time to look at speak and talk. Luckily, these are much easier than say and tell, which is why this section will be a lot shorter. I'm sure you know what these mean. Both of these mean to say words, and often we can use them interchangeably, but there are some small differences. And by the way, talk is a regular verb, so the past forms are both talked, and speak is an irregular verb. The past simple is spoke, and the past participle is spoken. The main difference between these two verbs is that speak is a little bit more formal and sounds a little bit more serious than talk. I said a little bit because even in formal situations, people still sometimes use talk, and in informal situations, people sometimes still use speak. I've read in some places that speak should be used in formal situations and talk should be used in informal situations, but honestly, the rule is not that strict. It's just that generally speak sounds a bit more serious. For example, if you're in a meeting at work with some managers, you might say, I spoke with our suppliers last week. You could also say, I talked with our suppliers last week. That's absolutely fine. You're not going to shock or offend anybody if you use talk. It's just that in that situation, it's a little bit more common to use speak. Now, if you saw a friend and had a conversation, you would probably use talk. We talked for over an hour. You could also say, we spoke for over an hour. That's fine too. It's just that the first sentence is a bit more common in that situation. Another thing that sometimes confuses people is whether we should use to or with after speak or talk. Obviously, you don't need to use to or with. It will depend on the sentence. In these sentences, for example, it's not necessary. There are also sentences like, my colleague speaks very loudly. Or, Frank never stops talking. But if you want to indicate the direction of the language and put a person or a group of people after the verb, you need to or with. Usually you can use them interchangeably. For example, I talked to or with Frank about his tardiness. I talked to or with my colleagues for an hour. In both of these sentences, you could also use speak. Here is the basic rule for to and with. If you have a conversation between people, if there's an exchange, you can use either to or with. If, however, you have a situation in which the talking is basically just going in one direction, you should use to. For example, our managers talked to us about the new rules. At the assembly, the principal spoke to the students about the graffiti. In these situations, there probably isn't an exchange. There's just a person or a group of people giving information. So we wouldn't use with here. Just a couple more points before we finish. To talk about languages, we use speak. For example, she speaks Chinese. We speak some Spanish. How many languages do you speak? The exception to that rule is if you're talking about the language that people are using in a specific situation. Then you have a few options. For example, I couldn't understand them because they were speaking Greek. Here you could also say they were speaking in Greek, or they were talking in Greek. But you can't say they were talking Greek. If you use talk for a language, you need in. And remember, if we're talking about somebody's ability to communicate in a language, like in these sentences here, we use speak. Now the final point for today. Some of us make noises when we sleep. And I don't mean snoring or farting. Some of us say words. Sometimes what we say makes sense, and sometimes it doesn't. But in any case, here we use talk. To talk in one's sleep. We don't say to speak in one's sleep. When Frank drinks too much, he talks in his sleep. That's it, everybody. I hope you found this useful. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that big red subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos. See you next time. Say usage. However, from about using, look at